Hello, everybody. I hope everyone's doing good. Today, I see a lot of familiar faces, so that makes me less nervous. Oh, all right, I'm just going to share my screen. One moment. There we are. Okay. Quick shout out to Isa, who's my friend and colleague, and she will be keeping an eye on the chat for me today. So, like Ashley mentioned, please go ahead and let us know if you have any thoughts, any questions, feel free to use the chat. So we're going to talk about creating a culture of deep thinking in the classroom. All right, we've started, so let's skip that. Oh, yeah. Just for laughs, I think we can all laugh a bit looking at this right at the beginning. I'm sure we all felt this way this year. In particular, at some point or the other, it's been a very challenging year, but I just want to say thank you to everyone. As educators, I can imagine, I think overnight we just took off and changed everything that we know, pulled ourselves out of our comfort zone and started exploring things, even though we were afraid at times, but we just went with it. And we always did what's best for our learning community. So I just want to tell you that you matter. And thank you for taking your time and being here today. Okay, so we're going to start off with a compass point about inquiry. And you're probably wondering, like, didn't you just sign up to do about deep thinking? And what is she talking about inquiry? All right, so they are so hand in hand for me. They complement each other. And in an inquiry-based learning, you're always asking students to explore materials. You want them to share their ideas and you want them to ask questions. And that's everything that we're going to be talking about and sharing our experience with that today. So clearly from the name compass points, there's east, west, north, and south. So if you could click on that Padlet link, just go over there and write down what excites you about inquiry, what worries you about inquiry, or sharing ideas in the classroom, or asking questions, and what do you need to know, and what is your current position? So what's your stance about inquiry? So I'll give you about 3 minutes to go over because of time constraint, and just feel free to add your responses.
Steffi, for anyone that doesn't have the presentation open right away, could you share the link here in, thank you, there we go, perfect, thanks. So the link is also here in the chat for anyone that needs it.
For those of you who are just joining us right now, we're doing a compass point about inquiry. So if you have access to the slides that I'm presenting, and if you would click on the one that says compass point, it should take you to this. If you've added your response and you're just waiting, feel free to like another person's response, and you can even comment, add your thoughts right over there. Thanks, Johan. I see you already there asking questions to our fellow participants. Okay. There's my timer. We're going to stop. So anyone wants to get into a discussion right now, especially about what worries you about inquiry and about creating that culture of deep thinking in your classroom? I have about 3 minutes to discuss that and just share out loud.
Do we talk? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yes. It's been very quiet. Thanks for breaking the silence. Go on.
I am worried with the time constraints, because I mean, in the end, we're all so like, we spoke about how education has to change and the model for like your everyday, but the reality is right now, it's not completely changed. And sometimes inquiry can, since it's not something that can be so square as an activity, because the students can take you and it can like lead to so many other things. And then you have to kind of always bring it back and be in this time frame. Like that worries me a little bit.
All right, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
Someone added on the Jamboard something that I feel very related to, is about how to encourage our students to have that deeper thinking, especially right now that we're in online learning. And it's hard to teach them. It's hard. Sometimes they're not grasping what we're teaching, so it takes longer time. So that would be a big concern for me, you know, how to encourage that deeper thinking, that curiosity, and how to keep them engaged with that.
Great, thanks for sharing, Nisa. Anyone else? We have a very quiet group.
No, I would like to add something.
Sure.
What I'm worried about is not having parents or students or even administrators understand that we have to drop sometimes, and we have to drop the book and the notebook and exercises 1 through 5, because we have to do deeper thinking, you know. And sometimes it's like, wait, why are you not using the book? Why are they're not writing something on their notebook? It's like, because they're thinking. So sometimes that stops you a little. You know, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna do that. Just people worries about it. Okay.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Do we have another response? The last one, probably.
I'll go. I agree with that last response. I think sometimes the opposite is, you know, you want to take more time to allow the deeper thinking. And that time is a big issue for all of us in the school, no matter where you work in the school, right? It's always something that we're struggling with, is how to fit everything in. So I agree. I think that if we can allow some more student choice in that, it will just create that time for students to think about what they want to think about, and allow them to give, or choose how they show it, you know?
Absolutely. And, everything that you mentioned about your worries is exactly what is everybody's worry in general about teaching inquiry. And I've been doing it for a few years now, and I know that me and my colleagues have all felt this way several times. Anyhow, but in our exploration together today, I really hope that we would be able to make more sense of this and find strategies that you can probably use to move away from this sort of thinking. And like you mentioned, parents often also may not understand. And you might see that across different sections in different countries, the schools that you're working in. When you move into a thinking, routine, that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about visible thinking routines. How can you make it visible? How can you make it visible enough that you can share that with the community, that students are able to start talking about it at home? And that is one thing that we want students to do, like take it with them out of your classroom and do it at home and become naturally curious about things around them and ask questions. What we saw right here in the presentation, the compass point, is actually a visible thinking routine. And it's a great routine to use, especially at the beginning of a unit or a concept or a topic. I usually use this when I'm starting a particular topic, just because it gives me a lot of ideas on what are my students thinking. It's also important, as much as you want your students to think, it's important for you to know what are they thinking, how are they thinking about it. And this compass point routine gives me the opportunity to do that, just like we did it right now. It's great to hear from everyone. What is it that you find exciting? What worries you? Where is your stance at this point? And that gives me as a presenter a lot of ideas of, okay, so that's exactly what y'all are looking for. And hopefully we'll be able to cater to that today as we speak more. One quick tip that I would give you, I wouldn't go through all the slides in detail today because of the time, but a tip that I would give you if you're going to do the compass point with your class is always remember to start with the E. You want to start with what's exciting. You don't want to start off with what worries you, because it might just not set the tone at all in your classroom, especially for certain areas of learning and concepts. Students often do get really anxious about it. So the best way to go about it is to get them to start thinking about what excites them. And often you would come across that some students may tell you, I'm not excited about anything. What are you talking about? You want me to be excited about division? I don't even like it, period. So my suggestion to that is always to go and ask them another question. And that's what I usually do. I always say, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that, but what makes you feel that way? Can you tell me why is it that it's so challenging for you? How did you feel when you learned it before? So I just go ahead and have a chat with them and talk to them. And that just changes the atmosphere completely. It breaks down that anxiety your students may experience, and it immediately uplifts them to start sharing with you, because right there you're becoming someone who is listening to their thinking, and they're sharing that with you. So being a good listener and asking good questions when you're doing the routines is equally important. So we're going to talk about how do we create this classroom community of inquiry or deep thinking. Something that's really important is building that community. It's super important. It's just like at the beginning of the year where you spend a lot of time getting to know your students and building the relationships with them. It's the same way when we want to build a community for inquiry. You need to really let your students know that you care, that you're there to listen to them, and that you value every big or small idea that they can give you. When teaching through inquiry, it's very important to build that community. The students should be taught to listen to others. And this is something really important when you're building that community. And that's something you really want to emphasize in your classroom. It's not just about sharing your idea, but also being a respectful listener to others, and encourage them to share their thoughts freely. Often, as a teacher, we get into that mode where you want to be like, yes, I love that idea, great thinking. And then there's another student who probably didn't say something great, and you might just be like, yeah, but actually that's not what I'm looking for. So as an educator, it's very important to try and stay away from saying, yes or no. I always like to just say, thank you for sharing. But that doesn't make me perfect. There are a number of times I have to cut myself out and say, oh my God, did you just do that, Steffi? You just told them that was a brilliant idea. And you don't want to do that. Just say, thank you for sharing. You just want to let your community know that you are listening and you appreciate every idea that they're sharing with you. And, you don't want your students to feel scared. And the moment I do that in the classroom, where I'm going to praise someone for a really good idea or a question they asked, and kind of say, oh, that's not what I'm looking for right now, to another student, it just kicks in a lot of fear. It kicks in shame, and they will not want to share with you anymore. This is an activity that I do in my class. It's called a YARNTASTIC community. And you can do this at the very beginning of the year to set the tone with your students. Everyone needs to participate, and that is something super important. You want every teacher who's teaching, your TA, if you can get the parents involved, then your parents and all the students. We sit down in a big circle and we just start sharing one person at a time about ourselves. And that's where inquiry starts. It starts with each student. It's about them as a person. And when they start sharing about them, they just build confidence throughout the year to talk about anything else that you would be learning together. So the students talk about their experiences, their hobbies, their interests. And the important part is, I always remind the students who are listening, if someone is speaking, to be very respectful and to listen with their whole body. And when one person's done sharing, we usually clap and just say, thank you for sharing. And there's no questions asked at that point. We just allow everyone to share. We just say, thank you for sharing, and we keep taking turns to speak as a class. When all the students are done speaking, we talk about, because they're given a yarn, sorry, I forgot to mention that, they're given a yarn, so while they're talking about themselves, they wrap a yarn around a cardboard roll. And they'll see at the end of this activity how from the color that each student chose is so different. The way a student wrapped the yarn is different. And there's so much of differences that they notice. But at the same time, I've heard my students say, but we're also the same. Like, we're all fourth graders and we go here. So that really sets the tone right at the beginning of the year, where you're talking to them about, yes, you guys may see differences throughout this year. As we go on this learning journey together, you'll notice that probably, someone was thinking this way, or someone asked this question and you probably did it. But this is all about building their confidence and that trust and that respect as a community inside your classroom. And we also talk about how they felt when they were speaking and how did they feel when they were listening. And going forward, we discuss what can be some of the ground rules for us, or norms or essential agreements, however you'd like to call them, when sharing ideas and asking questions in the classroom. So this really sets the tone for us right at the beginning of the year. Of course, this is a very different year, having to see my students mostly online and not in person, but I did get a chance to see them, and this is what it looks like. So we're just all sitting in a circle. If you notice, they all have different, sizes and different colors of wools, different ways in which they wrapped it around. So it's a great activity to do right at the beginning, so you're setting that tone. Okay, this is something that I just realized, and it is a shocker, being someone who's taught in the inquiry way for quite a while now, but I've never actually intentionally thought, what am I really building with my class? And that was so important when I came across this blog post by Kat Murdoch. She's like a guru for inquiry, for those of you who know her. And it was in one of her blogs that I read this, and she was inspired by a book, which is called What Will We Build? And I just sat down thinking to myself, oh man, I never really thought about it. I never really walked into my year with my students thinking, what is it that I really want to build this year? I probably did think about it, but I never did intentionally do anything about it or write it down somewhere and become intentional in communicating that with the students in my classroom. So right now, I'd really like you to take a few minutes to think about that. What is it that you want to build when you're going into that classroom with your students? I really like to build a community of respect, trust, deep thinking, collaboration, and curiosity. So if you could go click onto the Jamboard link that is right here on this slide. And if you could go there and just take a sticky note, I'll go there with you guys. There we go. If you could please take a sticky and just add your response there. What is it that you want to build with your students? And once you've thought about it and you're intentional about it, discuss that with your class. Ask your students, what do they want to build this year? What are their expectations? So I'm going to put a timer for 3 minutes. And if you could just add in your responses. All the slides are the same. I wasn't sure how many participants are going to be there. So if you need more space, there are plenty of slides. Just have to go over to the next page. Thanks, Jan. I think some really, really good points here. Respect, of course. Yes, I think that's like the baseline for every classroom community. Respect and trust. Once there's respect and trust, I honestly feel the caring, the belongingness, the compassion, the fun, all of that is just going to come, follow along. Lifelong learning, a relaxed environment, respectful, and most of all, set big examples. I would like a community with respect and trust, excited about learning. A fun and creative community. Place for all of us to grow. Absolutely. I think that's really key when you have an inquiry classroom, because you're no longer the person who is just teaching, standing in front of the class and just teaching, but you are someone who's facilitating those discussions. And I often say, like, I'm the meddler in the middle, because I'm in the middle of my students and I'm always just around them, asking questions, learning with them. And just feel free to even say you don't know. And that's probably something that I missed out on saying to you guys today. If you have any questions at any point, and if I'm not able to answer them, I'm just going to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I probably don't have an answer to your question right now, but we'll definitely answer those questions later. And that's the same approach I use in my classroom. I don't really know everything. And I make it a point to tell my students that I do not really have the answers to everything, guys. You might just come up with a brilliant question that I may be like, oh, I don't know. And I just say, let's go and find out together. And that's how beautiful it is when you're learning through an inquiry approach. And I really, really love just learning along with them. Okay, and the timer is gone off, and so I'm going to leave it right there. And if you need to continue, just add your response, that's fine. So those are like 2 small activities that I can leave you with in terms of how to build a community in your classroom. You could have a Yarntastic community at the beginning of the year. Even if you don't use yarns, you just want to sit down in a circle and give students the time to explain and explore and talk about themselves. That's just as good as it can get. So why deep thinking? Before I answer that question, I would really like everyone to click on this image to take you to a Padlet link. And this is a wonder wall that my 4th graders created when they were learning about informational writing. And I'm going to explain it further once you've had a look at it. I'd really like you to use the chat at this point. While you're looking at this wonder wall, could you please write in the chat, what is it that you notice in terms of the questions that are being asked, in terms of the students' responses? Everything that you can notice, if you could please write it in the chat, that would be great. Isa just put the, oh. All right, I was just going to say that the link is in the chat, but I see that everyone's already engaging in the chat. Thank you for that. Open-ended, deductive questions. Questions are open-ended, making students think. All right. Classmates gave links to the responses. Nice affirmation for this community of learners. Different ways to respond, drawing, audio, text. So students choose their best method. Right. Students are comparing informational text with other genres, which shows what they know from past learning. Right. Students are participating in their interest area, a safe way to express their opinions without being judged. Absolutely. So thank you for everyone who's responding in the chat. And that's exactly why we do this activity. And this is a wonder wall that's not in our classroom, but that's a virtual wonder wall. If you are in person, you could just have a huge space in your classroom that is called a wonder wall and allow students to write down their questions and post it. A little later on, we're going to discuss about these questions and how students came up with these questions and how these question starts were given to them. And you're absolutely right. You know, instead of me as a teacher standing in front of the class and talking to them about, oh, guys, here's our informational writing unit. We're going to follow the Teachers College or any model that you follow. And lesson 1, bam. I often find that my students don't even remember. End of week 1, they're already like, what did we learn yesterday? So this really does tackle that for me. At the beginning of this unit, which is on informational writing, I just decided, all right, I'm going to ask them to come up with their questions. What is it that they want to learn about informational writing? And what is going to be surprising as an educator is seeing that it's going to be very similar to all those different strands and standards that you need to cover. Ultimately, you are going to get there. And this was something that I guess a couple of you mentioned, timing. How do we make sure that we have enough time to really teach through inquiry? But what we don't know unless you really dive into it is that your student questions will honestly tackle a lot of those standards that you often are, you know, pressured to have to complete, or you're always under that, oh my God, I need to teach this and this and this and this unit. But this way, it's just a lot more meaningful and it's their questions. And so they remember it. They remember that, okay, I asked those questions and this is what we learned. And it talks about, if you look at all their answers and their questions to informational writing, it basically is all the features of informational writing right there through their questions and them exploring it. They just answered all the questions. All right, so why deep thinking? It's authentic. It enhances using one's ability in new situations. It's an opportunity to understand others' thinking as well as your own individual thinking. It encourages students to think how to learn and ways in which they can think. It helps educators understand what and how our students are learning. And always make sure that any thinking that you do in your classroom is never lost. That is one of the most important things to keep in mind as an educator. The more you show their thinking, the more visible you make it, the more they feel that you appreciate that, and the more stronger the community gets. So let's go into some visible thinking routines. Probably you can write a quick yes or no in the chat if possible. How many of you have used visible thinking routines in your classroom? If you could quickly let me know in the chat so I have an idea of how many of us are familiar with them. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's a good group of us who's used it. Yes, or try to. I like that, Naomi. That's me too. Probably yes, or I try to. As much as I always want to do it, but try to. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few visible thinking routines, and I just want to quickly brief a little bit to those who probably haven't worked with visible thinking routines yet. It's a research-based approach to teaching thinking, and it began at the Harvard Project Zero. And all right, so children must be taught how to think and not what to think. And I think that is a huge reminder for myself every day. Everything that I do, I try to tell myself, please, please, please don't tell them what to think. Just tell them how to think. And you know, no matter how many years you've been doing that, you still do have that tendency as a person and as a teacher where you just want to really control the whole situation and tell them what's best for them and what they need to learn. But hold back on that a little bit and try to just enjoy the process as much as you want the product to be great. So here are some thinking routines that I use for provocation exploring. I'm also going to go into some new thinking routines that I have used. This one is one of the core thinking routines. It's called a See, Think, Wonder. Shout out quickly if anyone's really used this in their classroom. It's quite popular. If you've used it, you can just let me know in the chat and just say yes. All right. Yep, Johan says it's great. It is. I agree. It is super easy. It's just show them an image, ask them what are they seeing, what are they thinking about that image, and what are they wondering when they look at it. And I love using this throughout the year with my students. This is an example of what my grade 4 students did recently, a Martin Luther King Day activity. And it's very important. One tip that I would give when you're doing the I see, I think, I wonder is making sure that you remind your students that when they're answering the I see part of it, it's only what they observe. Just look at the picture. What's the most evident thing by looking at it? You don't want your students to start analyzing it at this point. It's only for, I see a man, I see some words. As simple as that is, because you want to track how their thinking is changing in just by asking them, what do you think? And then all of a sudden, my students are thinking some really deep stuff here. They said, maybe he wanted to bring about a lot of changes in education. Maybe he was an educator. Maybe he said that because of his experience. So if you just take a moment to quickly glance through it, you'll see, you know, the deep thinking that really comes out of such a simple thinking routine. The next one is called question starts. And question starts is what I use for my wonder walls. So if you notice on the Padlet earlier that you saw, all the questions that my students used were from question starts. Question starts are about 8 question starts, sentences that they can use. So whenever you want to start a topic at the beginning, it's a great routine for creating some thought-provoking questions. And I always allow my students to explore those questions as well. And you can choose to do it along with them or just let them be independent and do it by themselves. So why, what are the reasons, what if, what is the purpose of, how would it be different if, what if, oops, sorry. What if we what if we knew, what would change if, what's the purpose of? So there's a lot of different types of question starts here. And if you give them the list and just give them the flexibility to come up with those questions, right there, you'll have a lot of thought-provoking questions from your students. And then you can brainstorm or just star the questions that you want your students to talk about, to inquire, to explore. And a quick tip about this is if you use question starts and you're having a wonder wall and your students are exploring about a concept, make sure to always have time to reflect on it. Probably after they answer about 5 or 6 questions, or you could keep a time frame by the end of this week. Let's sit down together and let's have a look at this and all their responses and get them to talk about it and reflect on all the new ideas that they have collected by trying to answer their questions. And this is another example that we use. I'm going to skip that because of time, just move on. It's on the slides, so please feel free to go back and have a look at those later. If you're looking at perspective, I'm going to talk about a new routine that I used recently, and it's for perspective taking. And it's called lens or lenses. And trust me, when I started this, I was like, oh my God, that's so impossible for grade 4 students to probably do this. And I really questioned it. But I realized how important it was just to have that community of thinkers, and the fact that we have been doing visible thinking routines right from the beginning of the year. And we've got that community where everybody's comfortable, they trust each other, they're sharing and they're happy to share. It just made me realize that that's why it's called a routine. I was like, yeah, Steffi, that's why it's a routine. You got to do it. That is something that I really would encourage everybody to do. Do it as much as you can. It should become a part of your classroom. It's not an activity or any of the visible thinking routine that we're talking about here or the ideas that we're discussing. If you just do it once or twice, you wouldn't see the fruits of it. It doesn't become a routine. And the entire idea revolves around making sure that you do it as often as you can in your classroom. It has to be a routine if you need to see that deep thinking, if you want your students to dive in and engage as much as they can. So I'm just going to leave this here for you to have a look at it. Just see the responses of these students. The first part is asking them by giving them a painting. It always has to be an artwork. But in the past, I've also used actual art pieces of Picasso or any other famous artist you want to use, where probably there is some patterns and geometry involved. I've done that last year with a group of students for geometry. So show them an art piece and just ask them, what is it that you notice? So the first one is all about what they notice. I'll just go back. This is all about what they notice. Again, like the I see, I think, I wonder, you want to ask your students to refrain from analyzing at this point. They don't need to analyze the image that you're showing them or the artwork you're showing them. You just have to let them tell you, what are they noticing? What is very obvious to them from looking at this picture? I can see the many different responses from the students. Yes, absolutely. Anything. And that's why I always say, when it comes to the thinking routines, feel free to use your teacher judgment. Many of the visible thinking routines would say this is best for math, or this is going to be great with arts, or if you're doing a civic unit. But try it around in different subject areas, and you'll soon realize which one works really well and where you see the most engagement in your classroom. Absolutely. Yep. It does. It will surely, it's great to get your students to debate and think and see different perspectives about it. So once you ask them to notice something, then you give them a couple of lenses. I always explain to my students, like, put on your little lens, and their lens could be their ethnicity, their gender, the age, the race, their culture. Any of that could be a lens that they use. They put on a lens and then they look at the same painting again to just realize how they're seeing it in a totally different light this time. And they notice how every student comes up with a totally different perspective. if you look at these responses right here, it really did blow my mind when I saw my students' responses, and I was like, wow. I wasn't sure how this was going to work, but it truly did work out really well with my group of kids. And they said, as we know, with the lens of a girl, the girl is trapped and can't have the freedom to say everything that she wants to say. Some of them use the lens of politics and said that I see that many countries are silenced by other countries. This was done by grade 4. And some of them said that through the lens of my country, I see that hands are from Venezuela and they aren't free because we have a lot of fights and marches. It opens up a really deep discussion in your classroom because all of a sudden it's the same picture, different sets of lenses being used. Everything is seen in a fresh perspective. Once you've done with that, so this is in a 3-part. So the first one is where, what do you notice? The second part is, how do you see this work through your lens? And your students have the option to choose any lens that they want to. And the last one is, what new ideas have you gained from this discussion? It's great to see how much students have already learned just by sharing ideas, just by looking at one artwork and just looking at it through a different lens. You see the amount of new ideas that they have gained from that discussion. They say that racism still is there in so many countries. People fight for freedom. Any person, be it man, woman, girl, or boy, should be free and have rights. There is still so much racism against certain people that when you look at things through a lens, it makes you think hard and appreciate it. And also they notice how everybody has different ways to see things. So it's a really, really great routine, and it can work for any of the elementary classes. It's just, like I said, play around with the kind of images that you choose, and that's about it. Claim support question. If you want to dig deeper into something, it's a really great routine to use. I love using this routine for math. I always start my math units, or if I'm talking about a new concept, I always try to talk about the claim support question routine. So they have to make a claim about a topic, and then they need to support it by giving you what they see, how they feel, and what they know about that topic. I often ask my students to have a look at the support part and give them that opportunity to even draw what they're thinking, especially in math. I do ask them, go ahead and support it with a diagram or a picture or a taped diagram, an area model, whatever you want to use. Just show me your support. It doesn't always have to be in terms of writing. And it's great because you'll see how much your students are thinking. Sorry, got distracted with a question. I'm going to answer that question in a bit, okay? All right, here's a sample. And the question was just, what is division? As simple as that is. What is division? I hadn't started teaching the concept yet, and it was just me asking them, what is division? If I was to just ask them, have you done division before? I know the responses that I'm going to get is probably yes or no, or it would be like, oh my God, Miss Steffi, do we have to talk about division now? Like, I don't like it. So this, like, going into a claim support question when you're starting a concept or a topic just gives you a lot of information about what your children already know. What is it that they're coming into your classroom with? What is their pre-knowledge about this? And so over here, the claim, you can see, what is division? The student says that division is opposite of multiplication. In division, you're separating things. It's a group of things that are split into equal parts. And then a couple of support. And this is what I meant when I said I let them write number sentences, draw a model if they need to show their support for each of those claims that they made. And then you have question. And I really like how it brings out a lot of new questions. And it's surprising because at the beginning of the year, I usually do ask my students for claim support question in math. I always ask them, how do we organize numbers? And every single year that I have done that in the classroom, I've noticed that students always ask me questions about Where did numbers come from? Who created 0? How do they even think about that each number should look like this? So we go into so much about the history of math, which often surprises me because, you know, as a teacher, you probably think, oh, my kids probably know that. I mean, what's so new about it? But you'll be surprised when you throw a question at them and you tell them to give you a claim, a support, and a question, and ask a question about it. It opens up a lot of discussion in the classroom. And that's deep thinking right there. All right. And with that, I'm kind of wrapping up with my presentation, and I would like everyone to please, if you could go to this Padlet link, and then we'll discuss for a little bit about any questions or just share ideas till time is up. But if you could go and write down in the Padlet, what did you think inquiry or deep thinking was before? And how has your thinking changed? Or be honest, even if your thinking did not change today or you're not going back with something, just feel free to write down in all honesty. This reflection that you are adding in right now is actually also a visible thinking routine. So you can always use this when you're done engaging in a particular concept or a topic. Always ask your students what they used to think about it and what they're thinking right now. It shows so much. It shows how their thinking has changed, you know, across the unit or topic. And I always love asking my students that. And it's also information for me as a teacher. I look back at that reflection and I ask myself, okay, is there any misconceptions there? Has their thinking changed? It doesn't always have to go in a way that you expect it to go, but look at it as each, you know, individual responses, and have a look at each child that you know, the students in your classroom, and has there been a change? So keep the slides. You know, everyone has the slides. Keep them because I didn't really go through every explanation of the visible thinking routine that I shared today, but you could continue to look at them, see the examples, and let me know if you ever use them in your classroom, if you are new to this, if you've used it, or if there's any routine that you saw today that you're using, that would be great. You'll also see that on the slides, I did put in a toolbox. So there is the homepage to the Project Zero Visible Thinking Routine, and you'll get a whole lot of routines. I love this website and blog of Kat Murdoch, which I very ardently keep reading. So the link to her blog is right there. And here is a Google document with all the different apps that you can use, especially when you're online right now. It has various apps related to each visible thinking routine that you could try out. And thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to continue to connect with me. And that's my Instagram handle right there. I'm going to stop presenting and then finally see everybody.